When my parents first asked if they could stay with me, it sounded harmless. It was late October when they called, my mom's voice thin and strained over the phone. Their lease had fallen through, something about the landlord selling the property out from under them, and they were caught in that nightmare limbo of not having anywhere to go. They just needed a few weeks, they said, just until they found a new place. And what kind of daughter would I be if I said no? At the time, it felt like the right thing to do. They had raised me, after all, put food on the table, worked long hours, and sacrificed plenty so I could have the life I had now. I had the space, a small but cozy 2-bedroom condo on the edge of town, bought with years of saving, late nights, and working 2 jobs when I was younger. It wasn't fancy, but it was mine. My safe place. My proud little piece of the world. Letting them stay felt like repaying a debt. A full circle moment. So with a deep breath and a forced smile, I told them yes. I even cleared out my second bedroom, moving boxes into storage, buying fresh linens, setting everything up so they would feel welcome. It felt good in a way, comforting, like I was doing the right thing. The first few days were fine. Awkward, sure, it's hard to go back to living with your parents once you've built a life of your own, but manageable. They were polite, if a little nosy. Mom rearranged my spice rack without asking. Dad left his boots in the middle of the hallway like it was still 1998. Little things. Annoying, yes, but forgivable. It was just temporary after all. Just a few weeks. But by the second week, small cracks started to form. Cracks that, once they started, seemed impossible to ignore. My mom started making comments about my lifestyle. "You shouldn't be living alone," she would mutter while folding laundry she wasn't asked to touch. "It's not natural, it's not safe." My dad took over my TV like it was his birthright, monopolizing the living room with endless sports channels I never watched. He grumbled about the cheap internet and how the neighbors parked too close and how my kitchen didn't have enough counter space. I gritted my teeth and tried to stay patient. Tried to remind myself that they were stressed, displaced, embarrassed to be leaning on their daughter at this stage of their lives. But there were moments, fleeting, sharp-edged moments, when I caught them looking around my condo like they were measuring it. Judging it. Claiming it. I brushed it off. I had to. Because this was temporary. It had to be. Then came the questions. Had I updated my will? Had I thought about adding them to my bank accounts, just in case something happened? They framed it as concern. Love. But it sat wrong with me. Deep in my gut, something prickled and twisted, warning me in ways I didn't want to acknowledge. One night, about 3 weeks in, I overheard them talking in the kitchen. Low voices. Tight tones. "She's too independent, it's not right," my mom was saying. "She's stubborn," my dad replied, "but we can fix that." I stood frozen in the hallway, my skin crawling. Fix me. I didn't confront them that night. I didn't even know how. I just went to bed, heart hammering against my ribs, telling myself, begging myself, that I was overreacting. But deep down, I knew something was shifting. Something I couldn't easily undo. 2 days later, I came home from work, juggling groceries and a dead phone battery, only to find that my key didn't work. Not jammed. Not sticky. It just didn't fit. I tried again and again. Nothing. I knocked, pounded, rang the bell. No answer. Panic rose in my throat as I banged harder, the grocery bags cutting into my wrists. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, my mom opened the door just a crack. Enough for me to see her face, calm and unreadable. "What's going on?" I gasped. "My key." "We changed the locks," she said simply. Like it was the most natural thing in the world. Like it was her right. I stood there stunned, the weight of the groceries suddenly unbearable in my arms. "But why?" She didn't answer right away. Instead, she gave me a tight smile, the kind you give a misbehaving child, and said, "You'll understand soon enough." Then she shut the door in my face. Click. Locked. I stared at the door, at the world I had built, the life I had fought so hard for, now locked away from me by the two people who were supposed to love me unconditionally. And in that moment, for the first time in my life, I realized something terrifying. This wasn't my home anymore. It was theirs. I stood there for what felt like hours. The groceries dug into my arms, the sun dipped lower, and the streetlights flickered on, one by one, as if the universe was quietly moving on without me. But I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe properly. It wasn't just the door that was locked, it was everything I thought I knew about my parents, about loyalty, about safety. Gone. Just like that. Finally, some instinct kicked in, maybe survival, maybe pride, and I stumbled back to my car. The groceries sat on the passenger seat, slowly leaking condensation into the cracked leather while I stared out the windshield, trying to process what had just happened. I called. I texted. Both of them. No answer. No explanation. I sat there until my phone died completely, the battery finally giving out in exhausted defeat, just like I had. When I finally pulled away from the curb, I didn't even have a plan. I just drove aimlessly for a while, the city blurring past in a haze of neon signs and headlights. I ended up in a parking lot near the strip mall on the edge of town, staring blankly at the glowing 24/7 diner sign, the way lost people do when they don't know what else to do. That's when it really hit me. I didn't just lose access to my apartment. I lost my home. My clothes. My documents. My laptop, my photos, my little emergency savings tucked into a drawer. Everything was still inside. Everything that made my life mine, now behind a door that no longer recognized me. The panic clawed up my throat again, but this time it was joined by something else. Anger. A deep, burning, white-hot anger that curled through my veins, making my hands shake as I gripped the steering wheel. How dare they? How could the people who were supposed to protect me turn around and betray me like this, with a calm smile and a soft click of a lock? By the time the diner's clock blinked over to 2:00 a.m., I knew I couldn't sit there all night. I found a cheap motel a few blocks away, the kind where the carpet smells like mildew and the sheets are scratchy, but it was a roof over my head. I handed over my last few emergency dollars and collapsed onto the bed, still fully clothed, still clutching my dead phone like it might somehow fix this if I just held it tight enough. Sleep didn't come easily. When it did, it was twisted and broken, filled with dreams of locked doors, whispered conversations, and my mom's strange, satisfied smile. The next morning, after a lukewarm shower and a breakfast of stale vending machine Pop-Tarts, I charged my phone at a cracked wall outlet near the ice machine. As soon as it powered up, I tried again. Voicemail. Voicemail. No response. I knew then that they weren't going to answer. They weren't going to explain themselves. They had made a decision. They had taken my life, my home, and decided it was theirs now. I drove back to the condo, heart pounding in my ears just to see. Maybe it had all been some huge misunderstanding. Maybe they had changed their minds. But when I got there, the locks were still changed. The curtains were drawn. The porch light was on, the one I always turned off when I wasn't home. Someone was inside. Living inside. But it wasn't me. I knocked again, softer this time. Still no answer. I stood there for a long time, fighting the urge to scream, to cry, to punch the door until my fists bled. Instead, I pulled out my phone and did the only thing I could think of. I started looking up lawyers. Because if they thought they could steal my life out from under me and get away with it, they didn't know me as well as they thought. They raised me to fight for what was mine. And now, that's exactly what I was going to do. Even if it meant fighting them. Finding a lawyer wasn't as easy as I thought it would be. Most places I called were polite but dismissive. Family disputes are tricky, they said. You'll want to resolve this outside of court if you can, they advised, their voices careful and distant, like they didn't want to touch the mess I was offering them. But there was no resolving this quietly. There was no sit-down conversation that would end with a handshake and a heartfelt apology. My parents had changed the locks on me. They had stolen my home. And they were refusing to even open the door. This wasn't some petty argument. This was war. Eventually, after nearly a dozen dead-end calls and a growing ball of hopelessness in my stomach, I found someone willing to listen. His name was Mr. Kessler, a no-nonsense, middle-aged man with a raspy voice and a patience that felt razor-thin. He didn't sugarcoat it. "You're going to have to fight for this," he said bluntly during our first meeting at his cluttered office. "It's not just about possession, it's about proof. You need to show that it's your property, that they had no legal right to take it." I nodded, fingers clenched tightly in my lap. "I have the mortgage documents," I said, "title in my name, no one else's." "That helps," he said, flipping through the stack of papers I had brought. "A lot." He leaned back in his creaky chair, studying me over the rims of his glasses. "Let me guess, you didn't have a written agreement with them about staying there." I shook my head miserably. Of course I hadn't. They were my parents. I had trusted them. "Well," he said, scribbling something down, "it's messier this way, but not impossible. You're technically the lawful owner, they're squatters at this point." The word hit me like a punch to the gut. Squatters. My parents. He gave me a thin smile, sensing the horror on my face. "Look," he said, his tone softening just a hair, "I know it's family, but the law doesn't care about bloodlines, it cares about facts. And the fact is they're in your home without your permission, that's all a judge will see." The next few days passed in a haze of paperwork and exhaustion. We filed a formal eviction notice. Had it served to them by a process server, a stranger they wouldn't be able to guilt trip or manipulate. I almost couldn't bear to watch from across the street as it happened, but I forced myself. I needed to see it. I needed to remember that I had a right to stand up for myself, even when it hurt. When the server walked away and my mom finally stepped outside, she looked around as if searching for me, her face twisted into something I didn't recognize. Betrayal. Rage. Disgust. She spotted me in my car across the street. For a long moment, we just stared at each other. Then she slammed the door. Hard. I drove away with my hands shaking so badly I had to pull over a few blocks later. I had expected anger. I had expected sadness. But nothing could have prepared me for the crushing, suffocating guilt that came after. This was my mother. My father. The people who had bandaged my scraped knees, stayed up with me during the flu, clapped the loudest at my high school graduation. And now here I was, serving them eviction papers like they were strangers. But when I closed my eyes and pictured that locked door, that tight smile, that voice saying "you'll understand soon enough," the guilt shifted. It twisted into something else. Resolve. They had made a choice. They had crossed a line. And I had every right to draw it back. Even if it broke my heart. Even if it meant becoming the villain in their story for a little while. Because if I didn't fight for my home, my independence, my life, who would? Certainly not them. The eviction notice gave them 30 days to leave. 30 days where everything hung in the balance. 30 days where my life felt like it wasn't fully mine yet, where I lived half in, half out of my own existence. I stayed in that dingy motel at first, sleeping badly, jumping every time my phone buzzed, convinced it would be another message from my parents, begging or threatening or both. But days passed. And there was nothing. No calls. No texts. Just silence. At first I thought maybe, just maybe, they were quietly accepting it. Maybe they realized they had gone too far. Maybe they would pack up, apologize, leave some kind of handwritten letter on the counter that I would cry over but ultimately forgive. I should have known better. Because about a week in, things started to get ugly. I showed up one afternoon just to check on the place, or what was supposed to be my place, and found the windows covered in bedsheets. Not curtains. Bedsheets. Tacked up sloppily like some kind of barricade. There were strange cars parked outside, ones I didn't recognize. Trash piled up around the side of the garage. The front lawn, which I had mowed religiously every Saturday morning, was wild and overgrown, the grass waist-high in places. It didn't look like a home anymore. It looked like a siege. I stood across the street, heart sinking, as I watched the front door open and a man I had never seen before stumble out, shirtless, a beer bottle dangling from his fingers. He shouted something over his shoulder and laughed before climbing into one of the junker cars and peeling off down the street. I felt like I was going to be sick. They weren't just squatting in my home. They were destroying it. I called Mr. Kessler immediately, my voice shaking with fury and disbelief. "Don't confront them," he warned firmly. "Let the clock run down. We'll escalate if they're still there after the 30 days. "But they're trashing the place." "I know," he said, voice low and grim. "Take pictures, document everything. We'll use it later, but don't engage. It'll only make things worse." So I did what he said. I snapped photo after photo, my hands trembling, fighting back tears. This wasn't just about my furniture or my walls or my stupid spice rack. It was about everything I had worked for, every late night, every scraped-together dollar, every dream I had poured into that little condo. And they were tearing it apart like it meant nothing. The betrayal burned hotter than ever now. It wasn't just cruel. It was deliberate. I realized then that this was never about needing a place to stay. It was about control. It was about power. It was about punishing me for growing up, moving out, living a life that didn't revolve around them. And they were going to hold my home hostage until they felt like they had made their point. The rest of that month passed in slow, agonizing misery. Every day I drove past the condo, heart hammering, documenting the chaos from a distance. More strange faces came and went. More junk piled up. More bedsheets went up over the windows, blocking out the world. My safe place, my proud little sanctuary, was becoming something unrecognizable. Every day that ticked by on the calendar felt like a lifetime. And underneath all the fear, the anger, the heartbreak, something colder started to settle into my bones. Determination. Because if they thought this was going to break me, they were wrong. If they thought making my home unlivable would make me give up, they didn't know me at all. Maybe they never did. The 30 days were almost up. And when that day came, if they weren't gone, I would be ready. I would fight for my home. For myself. No matter what it cost. Because some lines once crossed can never be uncrossed. And some battles are worth every scar they leave behind. The morning of eviction day, I woke up before the sun. Not that I had really slept. My body was too tense, my mind too busy running through every possible worst-case scenario. What if they refused to leave? What if they got violent? What if somehow, after all of this, I still ended up losing? I stared at the ceiling of my cheap motel room, the stained tiles swimming in the half-light, and let the fear roll through me in waves. But underneath the fear was something else. Steel. I had made it this far. I wasn't backing down now. Mr. Kessler met me outside the condo at exactly 9:00 a.m., along with a sheriff's deputy, a gruff woman with a no-nonsense stride and mirrored sunglasses that hid whatever she might have been thinking about the mess she was walking into. "This your place?" she asked, jerking her thumb toward the condo. I nodded, throat too dry to answer properly. She gave a sharp nod. "Let's get it done." The three of us walked up the driveway, the crunch of gravel under our shoes sounding unbearably loud in the otherwise silent morning. The place looked even worse now. Broken blinds dangled from the front window. An overturned trash can spilled garbage across the porch. There was a sour smell in the air, thick and rotting. This wasn't a home anymore. It was a battleground. The deputy knocked hard, sharp raps against the door that echoed down the street. I crossed my arms over my chest to hide the way they were shaking. No answer. She knocked again, louder. "Sheriff's Department, open the door." A beat of silence. Then slow, shuffling footsteps. The door creaked open just enough to reveal my father's face, lined and scowling, his mouth a thin, angry line. "What do you want?" he snapped. The deputy didn't flinch. "You've been served. Your 30 days are up. You need to vacate the premises immediately." My father laughed, a short, bitter sound. Behind him, I could see my mother peeking out, her expression twisted with fury. "This is our home now," he said coldly. The deputy shifted her weight slightly, her hand resting casually but clearly near the baton on her belt. "No, sir, it's hers," she nodded toward me, "and you're trespassing." He started to argue, words spilling out, fast and messy, about how I was ungrateful, about how they had a right to be there after everything they'd done for me. How family should mean something. I stood there and listened to it all, every bitter syllable, letting it wash over me without reacting. Because none of it mattered anymore. Not their anger. Not their guilt trips. Not their version of the story. The law was on my side now. And for once, I wasn't going to let them rewrite what was true. The deputy cut him off firmly. "You have 15 minutes to gather your belongings and leave voluntarily. After that, it's trespassing and I can remove you by force." The threat hung heavy in the air. For a second, I thought they might actually dig in their heels, force the issue, make an even bigger scene. But something must have shifted in them, maybe the sight of the uniform, maybe the realization that they weren't going to win this time. Without another word, they slammed the door. 15 agonizing minutes later, they emerged. Dragging battered suitcases. Carrying boxes haphazardly taped shut. My mom shoved past me without looking at me. My dad muttered something under his breath, a curse, maybe, or just pure bitterness. Neither of them said goodbye. They loaded their things into a dented old car I didn't recognize, probably one of their new friends, and drove off without a backward glance. Just like that. The deputy turned to me after they were gone. "You're good now," she said, pulling off her sunglasses to give me a look that was surprisingly gentle. "Change the locks today." I nodded numbly. She patted my shoulder once, brief but solid, and then she was gone too. And I was alone, standing in front of the wreckage of what used to be my life. I walked inside slowly, every step heavy with grief and disbelief. The smell hit me first, a mix of cigarette smoke, mildew, and something worse I couldn't even name. The carpets were stained. The walls were scuffed and dirty. Trash was everywhere. Furniture broken, some things just missing. It wasn't just a home they had stolen. It was me they had tried to erase. But as I stood there in the middle of the wreckage, something strange and powerful rose up inside me. I was still here. The walls were still standing. And so was I. The first thing I did was call a locksmith. I didn't even step fully into the condo until he arrived. It felt too vulnerable, too dangerous, standing there alone with a busted lock and the ghost of everything that had gone wrong lingering in the air. The locksmith was an older man named Greg. He didn't ask questions when he saw the state of the place, just gave me a grim nod, rolled up his sleeves, and got to work. It didn't take him long. When he handed me the new set of keys, I think he could see something in my face, the exhaustion, the disbelief, the weight of what had happened. "Fresh start," he said simply, pressing the cold metal into my hand. "Fresh start." I repeated the words silently to myself like a prayer. When he drove away, I locked the door behind him. Twice. Then I turned and really looked at what was left. It was worse than I thought. The walls weren't just dirty, they were covered in angry scribbles. Sharpie messages scrawled across the paint like a final punch to the gut. Ungrateful. Selfish. Family betrayer. It shouldn't have hurt. I knew they had crossed the line, not me. I knew I had done the only thing I could. But still, seeing those words, meant to shame me, meant to make me doubt myself, it hit hard. For a few minutes I just stood there, staring, frozen between fury and heartbreak. And then I moved. I grabbed garbage bags from the kitchen. I found rubber gloves under the sink. I opened every window, letting the cold, fresh air pour in. And I started cleaning. It was slow, brutal work. Bag after bag of trash. Scrubbing the walls until my arms ached. Throwing out furniture that smelled too much like smoke and anger to ever be salvaged. But with every sweep of the broom, every wipe of the rag, every slammed garbage lid, I felt a little bit lighter. Like I was scrubbing away not just the physical mess, but all the lies, all the guilt, all the shame they had tried to leave behind with it. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't some triumphant movie montage where everything magically gets better overnight. It was real. Messy. Slow. Painful. But it was mine. And that made all the difference. Over the next few weeks, I rebuilt my home piece by piece. New paint on the walls, soft blue in the living room, warm gold in the kitchen, colors that made me feel safe and alive again. A second-hand couch from a thrift store, a little battered but comfortable. New dishes. New curtains. Not expensive things. Not flashy things. Just mine. Every choice I made felt like stitching myself back together. Like telling the universe and myself that I wasn't broken. That I hadn't been defeated. Friends came by to help, real friends, the kind who showed up with paint rollers and bad pizza and stayed late into the night just to laugh and remind me that love doesn't have to hurt to be real. Some nights I cried, still overwhelmed by it all, still grieving the parents I thought I had. But most nights I went to bed exhausted but proud. Because every small act of rebuilding was an act of defiance. A declaration. You tried to break me. You failed. The hardest part wasn't fixing the condo. It was fixing the way I saw myself. For so long, I had let guilt drive my decisions. Let loyalty twist into obligation. Let the people who were supposed to love me define my worth. But not anymore. I wasn't just rebuilding a home. I was rebuilding me. And for the first time, maybe ever, I was doing it on my own terms. No guilt. No shame. No apologies. Just the strength. And when I finally sat on my new couch one quiet evening, a cup of tea in my hands, a soft lamp glowing beside me, the clean, safe walls around me whispering of new beginnings, I realized something powerful. They had locked me out. But I had found the key inside myself all along. It took months for life to fully settle again. Even after the last wall was painted, after the last bag of trash was hauled away, after the new locks clicked firmly behind me, there were still echoes. Little things that would catch me off guard. A creak in the floorboards at night. A glance at the empty guest room, remembering how it all began with a simple, trusting just for a few weeks. Sometimes, even in the middle of the brightest days, a wave of sadness would hit me so hard it left me breathless. Not for the home. Not for the things. For the relationship that had crumbled into dust the second I said no. But grief, I learned, isn't the enemy. It's a teacher. It shows you who you are when everything else is stripped away. And standing in the ruins of everything I thought I needed, I had found someone stronger. Someone wiser. Someone who didn't confuse sacrifice with love. Someone who didn't measure loyalty by how much they were willing to lose themselves for other people. It wasn't always easy to explain to others. When friends or coworkers asked why I didn't see my parents anymore, I usually gave some vague answer about growing apart. It wasn't a lie. It just wasn't the whole messy truth. Because the real story, the real heartbreak, wasn't about a broken lock or a trashed condo. It was about realizing that sometimes love has limits. And setting boundaries doesn't make you a bad daughter or a bad person. It just makes you human. They tried to paint me as selfish, as cold, as ungrateful. But here's what they never understood. Choosing yourself isn't selfish. It's survival. It's building a life that's healthy and safe and yours, even if it means losing people you once thought were permanent. And once you taste that kind of freedom, true, hard-won freedom, you can never go back. I thought about them sometimes. Where they were. If they blamed me still. If they ever missed me even a little. But I learned not to linger on those thoughts for long. Not because I didn't care. Because caring didn't mean I had to sacrifice myself anymore. I still sent a Christmas card that first year, no return address, just a simple wishing you well. It felt like closing a chapter with grace. They didn't respond. And that was okay. Not every story gets a tidy ending. Not every wound scars cleanly. Some people leave quietly. Some people slam the door so hard it rattles the walls forever. Either way, life moves on. And so did I. One quiet Sunday afternoon, almost exactly a year after they changed the locks on me, I hosted my first real housewarming party. Friends filled the condo with laughter and chatter, tracking crumbs across my freshly cleaned floors, pouring wine, telling terrible jokes. It wasn't fancy. It wasn't perfect. But it was filled with something real. Joy. Freedom. Peace. At one point, I stood in the kitchen, looking around at the warm, bustling chaos, and felt a lump rise in my throat. Not sadness this time. Gratitude. For the fight. For the lessons. For the chance to build something better. Something mine. When everyone finally left that night, I locked the door behind them, smiling as I heard the solid, satisfying click of the new deadbolt. I leaned against the door for a moment, soaking in the quiet. The safe, soft, earned quiet. This was my home. I fought for it. I fought for me. And I won. Not with cruelty. Not with revenge. But with courage. Courage to walk away from what hurt. Courage to rebuild with my own two hands. Courage to choose a life that was small, imperfect, and absolutely perfect for me. And as I curled up on my second-hand couch, wrapped in a cheap throw blanket, sipping tea from a chipped mug, I knew something deep in my bones. No one would ever lock me out of my life again. Not ever.